Hi, and welcome back to the Inner Design Podcast. Today, I have the honor to introduce you to my lovely friend and colleague that I've known for a few decades now, Tony Di Zinno. Tony has colored his career as a visual storyteller with a patina that includes subjects of propaganda for Nike, humanitarian projects in Afghanistan, and conservation of species in Africa. More recently, as an explorer with a lifelong love of learning, he has found a new chapter as an equine specialist working with horses to help others heal from psychic wounds such as sexual abuse and trauma. He also has a current project contributing to the revised book called Fundamental Life Tool for Kids. This book provides actionable tools rooted in mindfulness and art, which with Inner Design, we're very, very aligned with, and it helps navigating emotional, mental, and spiritual challenges. The tools are designed to teach that you are not your thoughts. You are the one witnessing them. Originally designed for teens, tweens, facing adversity, the tools are adapted for anyone seeking emotional balance. And these techniques stem from the author's experiences as mental health advocates working with the Indivisible Arts based in South Bay. Tony also teaches as an adjunct professor at Mount St. Mary's University, their graduate and undergraduate programs teaching photojournalism and documentary film. Today, we're going to talk about visual storytelling with purpose because Tony is the person who I've known carries that torch. Tony, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thanks, Rubina. Thanks for having me.
So I would love to, first of all, what accolades you have and all of this. I feel like even me reading and telling everyone a little bit about you and your experiences, just barely scratching the surface. I know that we both have the same background, being from Art Center College of Design, and specifically with photography. And you moved on to take that journey on to so many different levels. Can you just tell us a little bit about how that journey's been for you, like where you started, how you came onto this field, what inspires you?
Well, yeah, the origin story is that I grew up in a family, the oldest of four boys, and just love sports, and one of the great disappointments of my young life was that I wasn't allowed to play high school football. And I look back on that as sort of the sand and the oyster creating the pearl, because both my folks were good-hearted about it. They were medical professionals. My mom's a career-long nurse. My dad is a surgeon, and they'd just seen too many devastating injuries to allow it. And so I went through school just on the sidelines of that kind of participation and satisfaction, and it started something for me that I needed to get close to. So one of my driving passions early on was just sports and the love of it. And so the funny thing now to look back on and laugh is that I think there's an axiom about parents make all their mistakes on their first kid. And so each one of my younger brothers was allowed to play, and that it just made it even more important for me to fulfill this unrequited love. And so that was one of the things that was really driving my passion in terms of storytelling and image making, was that it was a way to express a kind of, you've heard the expression of love letter. So when you have an affinity for something, the word itself is about being close with, right? So how close could I get with what little talent I had? And fortunately for me, it just all kind of came together. And the short version of the story is that back in the day, the greatest pictorial was Life magazine. And sure enough, they did an Olympic preview. And now, mind you, I was only a kid, like 8 years old, when I became aware of this wonderful thing that was the treasure chest of great photo essays and documentary work. And in this Life magazine, it was the 72 Olympics from Mark Spitz. So I was just a little kid, but even then I understood that the shots that were being shown there were impossible. They were far and away artful, and it caught me long before there was any kind of internet. And I had to find out who was doing this. It was singular, and sure enough, I applied myself, and I found the photographer. It was a Dutchman named Co Rentmeester, and sure enough, I dug a little deeper, and it turns out that he went to this place in Pasadena that you and I did, which is called the Art Center College, and it must have made an impression on me because that stayed with me. And as you know, ended up going there, and even being a classmate to his daughter Amy, who became something of a fashion photographer. But that leap from this impossibly beautiful thing, and how to get close to it. What is that artist doing that's different than everyone else, and how do I deconstruct it and understand it and absorb it? And that was really early on, and it never left me. The first pictures I ever took were with a little brownie camera, so like a square box, and you look down into a wasteful, and it's just this thing of beauty, and it's so simple. And in the first roll I ever put into a camera to photograph was my brother in a football helmet, right? And so, I find myself even years later, sort of in the rut of doing the same thing in terms of that initial passion and connecting it to producing something beautiful. So
Yeah, I think it's very beautiful to share the things that you see in the world as a photographer. That's really an opportunity to give others that, option to see from a different point of view. I think it's very powerful.
yeah, so I was so fortunate to get it to an art center, and find teachers there who had the generosity of spirit to invest in me before I had a body of work to evidence any talent. And I'm sitting in the office of my dear friend Andy Bernstein, who's one of Art Center's top 100 alum, and he's a dear friend who's a Hall of Fame sports photographer. So I feel like, while this isn't my office, I feel I'm in my element. And Andy and I speak the same language about, the hero worship and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, getting out of school and going over to Europe and showing my work and trying to make my mark in the world, it was pretty clear that I had to step into the assisting and the old sort of apprentice to the master kind of tradition. And in that experience, I ended up working with a Rolling Stone photographer named Bonnie Schiffman, and we did the Book of Comedy. For a year and a half, we did all the greatest living comedians, from Robin Williams, who's on the cover, to every comedian that was alive at the time. And so it was another form of continuing my education. And while that seems really different from sports, the ESPN as an acronym means Entertainment Sports Network. And that in itself was just a perfect complement to what I ended up doing in terms of meeting superstars and working with them, and understanding checking your ego at the door was probably one of the most important things you could do in terms of really dealing with people, and not being too intimidated by persona or reputation or fame and that kind of thing. But yeah, it's a funny trajectory, because I sort of had that wish fulfilled of getting to get close to the people I admire, or was fascinated about and curious to meet, and then parlay that into a way of life.
Yeah, I like how you said that too. I think it's stating a little bit about the humbling process, and that we all are humans, right? And can you speak to that, like as a photographer, being behind the lens and the person being there in front of the lens? For me, I've been on both sides, and I'm not comfortable. I've had to become more comfortable on this side of the lens, but being behind there also, again, has some opportunity to make the impact and make that conversation, a communication with that person who's there, right, expressing themselves. I'd love to hear your process on that.
Well, I find that the two things that were in the library that I grew up in my own house was, I had parents who were mad about Hollywood silver screen, golden era stuff. So all the books were pictorials about directors, actors, filmmakers, and, defined my visual education from early on. In fact, I would say I'm a post-literate kid, and that's an expression I've come to embrace, which means that I learned more from cinema and these pictorial magazines about how to tell stories than I did until much later when we were in college, and you start reading more classic stuff and then become more literate, so to speak. And so all of these things, these two um, important languages that are related, photography and film, they generate empathy in a way that I don't know that any other form does for me. And I find that that's the first tool is I might be meeting somebody who's so famous that they have a bad reputation. And I have to consider, well, what am I bringing to the table? Am I bringing a bad attitude because they have a bad reputation? Or am I starting out in a way that's just neutral and holding space for them to be good or bad or wonderful? And so for me, it always starts with checking myself and how I can be present and real for someone, and equally not, when you talk about humility, it's not that making myself very small, right, or smaller than need be. It's a matter of being equal. Really, I'm neither superior or inferior to anyone. And in those situations where you're making portraits, I'll give you an example. Um, Through some crazy turn of events, I got to photograph Yo-Yo Ma, the great cellist, whose work I've admired my whole life, and he sat and he played for me, and I photographed him playing. And at the end of his aria and this piece, um, he was so delighted with the experience that he stood up and gave me a big hug spontaneously, because there was something about the interplay of what we're doing that I respected him and was, somehow in a kind of dance with him that he appreciated as a musician. And that's about as good as it gets, because we didn't have to talk about it. It was nonverbal. It was a participation of sort of joy in the moment.
Connection, I think. I don't know if that's uniquely with the camera compared to other art expression, other art forms. I think that maybe the performer on stage feels that with their audience, but it's a different thing because you're co-making the art, whereas maybe a performer on stage is giving their performance, giving their art to the audience who's receiving it. Whereas I think, the photographer, the filmmaker, you're not making the art alone without your subject matter, and in your case, having this opportunity to film and photograph people who are artists, and they have that opportunity to share that with you. It's quite a, beautiful, it sounds like a beautiful, intimate experience that you guys shared, like you said, even without words. And I know that we both have that aligned in inner design, as everyone knows. It's about bringing, the mindfulness through the creative experience and creativity as an expression rather than a product and outcome, but you're bringing that creativity expression to the outcome through that process. Can you talk about a little bit how mindfulness, meditation, breath work, all of the different things enhance our ability to create life, specifically your ability to create life and tell the story of other people's lives?
Well, mindfulness is, I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's not only your forte, but something that I wanted to dive into a little bit with you, because it's kind of a paradox. Even, I've later in life become a writer, and so now I dance with words. And when you mentioned before our show today that we might talk about mindfulness, I'm like, fantastic, because even the world itself, the word mindful is, if you just take that at its face value, it suggests that your mind is full. And
Yeah.
if I think about it, there's a paradox in there somewhere about emptying my mind. So it's not
Yeah.
quite so full. So to be mindful means that I've got to agree to participate in this thought, right? That I was thinking about on the way to this studio today, that most people drive a car, right? And there's millions of people who drive, and they almost are on autopilot. And I'm not talking
Yeah.
about cars that drive themselves. I'm talking about people driving themselves. And and it's so interesting because if you're on autopilot, you're not really being mindful in that moment. You're kind of disconnecting, right? So
Yes. Yes.
what is a mindful way to drive? And so when people say, well, what is mindfulness? Well, anybody who can get behind the wheel of a car with a license and drive legally can make this exercise, which is to say, for example, when I was teaching at Art Center, it was a matter of striving for mastery was one of the things we discussed, and so some students would scratch their heads and go, "Well, what does that mean?" And I said, "Well, when's the last time you drove to this campus?" And they said, "Well, today." And I said, "Did you drive perfectly?" And they said, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Did you do it with zero errors, no mistakes, no need for correction?" And it's sort of like just what we're putting our attention on, which is that you could take even this small, simple task of driving to school or to work or wherever from A to B. How well do you do that? Do you do it mindfully? So you're striving for some kind of perfection, whether or not it can be obtained, or are you doing it mindlessly and just kind of rolling out of your lane and having close calls and expecting other people to bail you out? It's it's fantastic to consider the challenge of even the simplest of exercises in terms of how we can approach. But yeah,
Right. It's a great point. I think, sometimes we have that experience. I've even had that experience. There's so many thoughts and so many things that are happening in your mind. You may be driving actually perfectly, right? Maybe quote unquote perfectly, or to the best of your ability, or you've driven a path that you drive so often that there is that autopilot, or like your mind kind of just focuses on, all these chattering thoughts. And then all of a sudden you're like, how did I get to my exit? I don't even remember making that turn. And now I'm home, like, thank goodness there's something that is
yeah.
functioning. But how much we can get lost in our thoughts. And I love how when you sent me that message that just said, you are not your thoughts, you are the one witnessing them. Because hearing those words from you, it really resonated very deeply for me. It's the sentence I was told from the age of 6. You're not these thoughts, you're the one witnessing them. And it's been something that has shaped my life, the whole way that I see things and practice. And to hear it coming from you, dear friend, who's out there in the world, we're very much parallel and aligned with our paths. Also made me feel like, we all are one, and how many other people might be out there having this experience maybe for the first time, or hearing us talk about what it means to
Mm.
be with not your thoughts and to be the one
Yeah.
witnessing them. I'd love to hear you tell me to you, to yourself, what does it mean to be not of the thoughts, the witness?
Well, yeah. The way I would look at that is if someone sincerely is asking, how do I begin to approach this thing, this concept, this practice of mindfulness? Um, I tend to remind myself in the inspiration from Kafka, who said beautifully, he says, "You do not need to leave your room. Remain sitting at your table and listen. Do not even listen. Simply wait, be quiet, still and solitary. The world will freely offer itself to you to be unmasked. It cannot help. It has no other choice. It will roll at your feet in ecstasy." Now think about that. It's inviting, not a headlong pursuit of chasing something, grasping at it, and suffering the misery of craving it. Like I want mindfulness and I want it now. It's like, no, no, no. Slow down. Just sit at your table. We're sitting. Don't even just sit there. Just listen. Don't even listen. Just be still.
Yeah.
And if you can do these things in descending order, you see how it's kind of this counterintuitive thing where you're doing what? You're surrendering to being so still that ask itself and reveal it's rolling in ecstasy at your feet. Are you even present to to be aware of that. So I think that's a gift from this great writer, which holds a promise, right? The promise being that if you're willing and can participate in ways that you hadn't considered before, that there's a gift, there's a deep gift in there.
Yes, yes. I believe even the world that he's talking about, like when you think about your world, we think about the world being out there, but actually, and then, we all say we have our own world, but the reality is while we are here in the world, of the world, we are the world, right? Because when we're not here, we're not experiencing that. Of course, others may be still experiencing their world. And
Mm-hmm.
just having this opportunity to be here, be part of this world, and make small impacts by not mindset, but practice by living in the space that, the mind can be at ease. We should call it mind ease or something instead of mindful. Mindless has a different connotation, so that doesn't
Right.
really fix, but maybe they should have been switched.
Isn't it interesting, right? So language
Yeah.
is interesting. There's the overt meaning, then there's a subvert meaning, perhaps. And so the whole thing that I'm describing is just a deliberation. You
Yeah.
take the
Yeah.
thing at the face value, and then how many times have I sat in teachings with His Holiness where he says, no matter the teacher, you must go away and think about it and deliberate and apply it and see for yourself. And that's His Holiness talking about these kinds
Yes.
of lessons, which is that I must develop a certain discernment between what is true and what is less than true. And that's why I love this expression of philosophy as a sort of a driving force in my life, which is the love of truth. And the Greeks put those two things together. Um, and then the question is, okay, now where are you going to develop this love of truth, and how do you test it, and so on. But I want to make sure that I'm answering your question, which was, you asked me something about meditation and mindfulness. Was that in preparation for work?
Or do you what is your practice? What if you're talking about these practices, give us a little hint, a little clue into the mastermind that you are and how that comes into the delivery of the work that you do.
Share with
There,
you.
yeah.
Yeah, I'll share with you, hopefully something that's useful. When I met the great photographer Dwayne Michaels, because he was visiting and lecturing, and it's kind of an incredible story because I knew I had to meet this great teacher, and um, and I went out of my way to make sure that I could meet him. And when he lectured, it was standing room only, and 400 people. And I thought, no, this will never happen. I'm just, who am I? I'm just nobody. And he's this, great teacher visiting, and so on. And the lecture finishes, and there was a huge lineup, and people seeking his autograph and his his picture and so forth. So I went away and thought, well, if I come back maybe in a little while, maybe there'll be less people. And when I did, there was only 5 people left standing around him, 3 students and 2 teachers. And one of the teachers turns and points at me and interrupts this great artist, this great teacher, while he's talking to the students, says, Dwayne, you have to meet Tony. Tony's the most important person you're going to meet today.
Awesome.
And he put me on the
Oh,
spot.
awesome.
And I didn't know what to say. What do you say when you're put on the spot? And I said, no, it's not that really. I just brought a silk scarf, which is a Tibetan Buddhist traditional gift to a great teacher. He goes, I know what those are. I need 5 of those. Can you come tomorrow at the gallery's opening? You have to be there. Bring 5. And with that, he jumped into a limousine and took off. So the next night, of course, I brought 5 as requested to the Fay Klein Gallery on La Brea. And it's even more insane. It's not room for a hummingbird to land. There's the who's who of Hollywood and Los Angeles photography. And I can't even see the man in the room for the gallery so full. So after about an hour and a half of trying to see if the artist was even there, I went to the front desk and I just made a note and said, hey, would you please deliver these to the artist, because he had asked me to bring them. And I stepped outside and I met some other friends, and sure enough, after chatting, I thought, I'll go back again, just another try. And there's something in that reattempting, right? That it wasn't ready to surrender and quit.
Yes.
There's no quit. So I
Yes.
go back, and now there's not that many less people, but I do catch sight of the man. And, he's unique, right? And he's
Yeah.
across the entire gallery, and we catch eyes. And he kind of does this, like a hint to go meet me over there. And so it takes another 20 minutes for us to move through this thick crowd. And when he gets to me face to face, he doesn't say, hey, thanks for coming, or I'm so glad you're here. There was zero small talk. Dwayne Michael says to me, I know that you know something that I don't know, and I need to know what that thing is. And
Wow.
he put me on the spot again. And I thought, well, what is true? And I thought, this is true. I said, it's maestro. It's not that I know more than you. It's that we know the same things, and that we can look across a crowded room and see each other and look each other into the eyes and know that we are family. He goes, yes, yes, that's it. When are you coming to New York? I need to make your portrait. Will you sit for me? And so on. And you remind me of that story, because you're asking me about things that you know, that we both know. And that's a pleasure to sort of unwrap them and watch them blossom. And so in that case, there's something of recognition, right? I mean,
Yeah.
all those people in that place, I think I can say with some certainty, had this desire to have a meaningful exchange with the artist or the great teacher. And so they're pushing, they're pulling, they're kind of vying for their space, and there's a hint of self-importance and all that stuff. And I might have been one of the only people in that entire crowd who actually brought him something, even as the smallest token gift, which the silk scarves they're so affordable that even the poorest peasant can get them, and in that gesture, this is the same story I share with my students. I said, so why is it that I had the experience? Why was I so lucky? How did it happen for me when every other person there who admired him may not have had that sort of intense exchange in the moment? And I really believe it's from just this pure motive. The motive was correct. I wasn't looking to take his time or his autograph, which I think are, that's a souvenir that doesn't mean as much as the conversation I had.
Right.
So yeah, when you ask me about these things, I think a story like that comes to mind, because we're all looking for great teachers. And if we're not, this is one of my primers for any student that I come across who's an emerging professional, and especially if they're storytellers. It's like, humble yourself, know what your motive is pure, and that you have permission. And this permission is largely self-assigned. And in that case, what a wonderful result, right? That you bump into these great teachers, and as you've had great teachers. And we all know about bad teachers. We don't need to be damaged by them.
Right. No.
We can even use bad teachers to inform us vicariously. That's not how I want to be. That's not something
Yes.
I
Yeah.
can use. In fact, it's useful to know what to avoid, right? So even a bad
True.
teacher can be a gift in that respect.
Very true. Your story reminded me of an interaction that you and I had. Maybe, I think it might have been 3 years ago, again, back on that same campus up the hillside. And we both attended, and now I can't remember. It's just trickling back to vague memory, but we both attended somebody else's talk. And you were on one side all the way up in the front, and I was maybe farther in the back. And there was that connection, like, oh yeah, there you are. We haven't seen each other in maybe a decade at that point, probably. And the recognition of, there's my friend, let's say hi. And there's so many other things happening in the room at the same time. Eventually we met up, and you said, and you just, the same energy that you held and you hold, and I'll call it presence. You were just there with full presence and said, Rubina, the work you're doing, it's so important. I hadn't even caught you up with all the stuff. You just had this presence. It really touched. I remember the sentence. I remember standing there and saying, oh my gosh, I haven't seen you so long. And we hugged and then you just stood there and you looked me straight in the eye and said that. And I think that is very unique. I think it's unique and it's personal to who you are and the presence that you walk around with and conduct. And I've been known to speak on photography. A lot of people don't guess that all my mindfulness, meditation, breath work, yoga, all the work that I've done stems from photography, actually. Photography was my first teacher of that. Although I traditionally learned meditation at a very young age, photography was the passion that drove me into understanding that all of life in action is mindfulness. And so I think you live that. You really, as a photographer, and a lot of times I'll say this, art photography is maybe one of the unique arts which only happens in the moment, and it's happening at that fraction of seconds, right? In that moment. So being really present, it forces you to be in that moment, understanding, predicting the light, seeing what's happening, capturing all this stuff in these micro moments. The brain is, sending off the fire signal to click the shutter. All of that happening. And if you aren't present, then really are you a true photographer? I don't know if it's possible to be absent in that moment. Whereas, maybe an artist who's painting or sculpting can start it, they can have rough sketches, they can go back and revisit it, they can leave it for hours, come back in the studio, it's still there, and they can keep adding to it. Sure, photography, we can add to it, we can modify, in the lab, all of that stuff, but the pure moment of capturing something is presence in action. And I think you really embody that even without the lens, but it's probably been a practice. So is there a practice? Is there a formal practice? Or is it just ingrained in your life of just who you are?
Well, can I tell you a quick story to answer that question?
Please. I
Because
love hearing the
it
stories.
complements what you're doing perfectly, which is that, you know, you're incandescent with the love of what you do. And that literally means to shine so brightly that it radiates. And this is the right kind of radiation because it infects people in the right way. And
Yes, thank you.
that's not only a gift, but it's a talent, and you're fulfilling that in a way that, think about it. Um, Part of what we're doing that's the most important thing in putting a frame on the world. If I put it up to my eyes, see, um,
Yeah.
what frame are we putting on, and who would I be if I didn't recognize the beauty in what you're doing? So there's a reflex that we have to nurture and build, which is that, do I even know what beauty is? Do I recognize it? Am I sensitive to it? Is there an intuition about, you know, the feminine sense of intuition? Can I dial into it even as a man, right? And so therefore, what things feminine are powerful for me to include and to absorb and to learn from. And so you embody all of those things. And so, telling you about my process is a little humbling because, you're already there, you're already doing it. And I'll give you a story. My younger brother went to Dharamsala in India, in northern India. Of course, it's the exiled capital of Tibet, where His Holiness has a monastery. It's Nongyal. And he had overstayed his visa, as Dharma bums will do. And I used that as an excuse to go out and see what his life was like. And I spent a few weeks, it was my first trip to India, and it was auspicious on many occasions. His Holiness was teaching the Avalokiteshvara compassion Buddha initiation, and people were coming from all over the world for that. And so I spent 2 weeks with my brother, and this is the important part of the story. His study partner was a Tibetan nun named Annie Tenson, and very shy, beautiful, shaved head, burgundy and saffron robes, but really introverted and didn't speak a word to me. So I understood that since my brother spoke Tibetan, if she needed anything from me, that he would translate. And we went together to temples, to teachings. And in 2 weeks, she didn't say anything to me. And at the end of that time, close to when we had to leave, Annie Tansen turns to me and says in perfect English, "Now I understand." It was like, Annie
Oh,
Tansen, you speak English. What is it that you understand? Please tell me. And she goes, "Photography is your meditation."
Yeah.
Now, of all the
Yes.
compliments I ever got anywhere from people trying to sincerely compliment, all she did was watch me work, how I moved,
Yeah.
and in her ritual and her practice, her way of being is to do what? Is to put a frame on something with a mantra and take all of the noise out. And this is her recognition of what I was doing that was similar to what she's doing in her world. So when you say you started with meditation and found photography as the vehicle, this is my cup of tea. This is exactly right. So even though you might think that, well, how much Zen could there be in the world of sports? Because that can be corporate and professional and jaded for all the reasons that we know. But maybe there's something more in terms of the personal fulfillment in this process. And so I'm very grateful to Annie Tenzin, and I tell that story to my students as well because it's about the participation. And in all these years, I could share with you everything I know about photography in 3 easy questions. It's a criteria for excellent decision making while working in the field. Would you like to hear that?
Yes, I would love it. Please.
So it's interesting that it's in the form of questions, not
Okay.
statements. And I find that to be already from the first moment feminine because,
Yeah.
mansplaining something is just obnoxious, right? So here's the 3 questions. The 3 questions begin and they seem so elemental that some people scratch their head and like, no, this is deep. Check it out. First question is, what am I looking at? If I can't answer that question, I'm lost. If I don't know what I'm fascinated with, attracted to, and getting involved with, if I have an emerging professional who's like, I don't know. Well, there's something wrong with that if they don't know what they're looking at yet.
Yeah.
But when I do know what I'm looking at, then there begins something in the process. And these are in a hierarchy. The second question is, where am I standing? Do I have any relationship? Do I have permission? Am I allowed
Mm.
to approach? If we were doing a portrait, if you and I were sitting, it can be very intimate if you collaborate with me and trust me to, first of all, that I have your best interests in mind and I'm flattering you because I look at you as an object of beauty. And that's not saying I'm objectifying you, I'm looking at the beautiful things about you. And so if that trust is there, where I stand is very much influenced by that relationship. So there's relationship to things in the field, right? That could
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
influence whether I shoot with a wide angle or a long lens because I don't have permission. If I'm on safari in Africa, I'm more likely to use a long lens for obvious reasons. But
Yes.
yeah. And the third question is, in turn, when do I shoot? Am I sensitive enough to know that there's a moment developing? Do I have pre-awareness? Is there something that I feel is coming that's in a way of knowing before I know? And the fourth question would be, I think, more retrospective. The beauty of creating work is that you have this moment to sit with it. And in our design training, there was, this design thinking model where you end up in the most important element I found was not just the prototyping or experimenting or the failing. It was the next step, which is sense making. We got to sense make. So here I
Yeah.
am
Yeah.
looking at what is possibly a contact sheet or a spread of the images. And it's like, okay, the fourth question is, what does it mean? Was I moved? Was I tickled? Did I learn anything? If so, then that may likely resonate with somebody viewing the same thing. So if my work resonates at all with someone, it's because it's resonated from me first. I can't expect them, the viewer, to do all the heavy lifting for me.
No.
I
Yeah.
must be
Yeah.
involved in that expression and that sensation and that impact, or it's empty.
Right. That's the visual storytelling part of it. It's yours saying, hey, this is what I want you to see. And sometimes it happens, like you said, by action, the activity that's there. Sometimes it's simply by light. It's motion that maybe does translate through or whatever it is. But I think that photography is beautiful in that sense that it gives you so many places. So I'm going to repeat back to you when the translator, Rubina, that also, as a teacher, I also kind of try and see like, okay, those same points. So the first point you're talking about is almost the what or the why, right? Like, what am I
Yeah, the
seeing?
why
But also maybe
follows.
there's a little why
Yeah.
in there, right? Why maybe the train that goes through the whole thing, because the next thing is maybe where, like you said, where are you standing? I would almost add how into that where, right? And then the when is everything. The when is really what photography and mindfulness is. It's knowing, do I hold my breath so that I don't get camera shake? I mean, I think that's when I realized I was doing breath work through photography, because it was, wow, there was a whole rhythm that my body had to be with this piece of equipment. It can be heavy sometimes. And depending on the amount of light and what's happening in the scene, is there a place for movement? And when you get really still, if there's not too much space for movement, the breath has to also be kind of controlled, stabilized, maybe even held or exhaled longer, just so that you can capture what you need. And so I think that you really have a beautiful formula. I'm glad you share that, because although you and I may have the experience both with mindfulness and with photography, there may be listeners out there that have never had this perspective of how they translate together. I like to call it mindfulness through creativity, but specifically with lessons with photography, it's mindfulness through the lens, because we have two lenses and it converges and we see things differently in the world when you close one and you start to see as a camera eye does. I don't think a lot of people realize that. Now we all have these devices and they have multiple cameras, and we're looking at it from a distance and it's giving us digital feedback. But in your and my days, we didn't know what we had, and sometimes that patience of, again, the when carried through, because until you were in the dark room, you didn't know if something was being processed, being developed, and coming through to, deliver anything, which I think is a different talent, a different skill.
Well, yeah, I'm going to call that an essential part of the process is uncertainty. For example, we can all relate to our comfort zones. You could draw a circle the size of your own desk or whatever and say, okay, inside this circle, I'm comfortable. And then the question is, well, are you stretching at all? Are you taking any risks? And that's calculated risk, not to be foolhardy. I often tell my adventurous students, there's no one image worth dying for. So don't take such a massive risk that you'll pay the ultimate price. And so, it's calculation that's involved. But when you're talking about the deeper lessons learned are coming from things that are experiential. So this is first person. It's self-reflexive. Well, why did I pick the subjects that I pick? There's a great story about an old Life magazine photographer named Albert Eisenstein. And Eisenstadt, I'm going to get that right. I should get it right. And it's just a picture of him sitting in a gallery in Santa Fe, New Mexico at the end of his life. And he's got this, like Andy has so many of these beautiful iconic images here.
Yeah.
There's the picture of the man sitting in, and it's a casual shot, but the caption in this case carries his sentiment, which is that somebody can come in here and I can tell them about me and my work, which is kind of how I feel talking to you about my previous, careers. It's kind of silly, but if they look at the images, they will know more about me than I can say in words. So
Yeah.
the entire visual language starts to be self-reflexive. So, he's the fellow who did so many images like the sailor kissing the nurse at the end of the Times Square and the end of the World War II.
Right.
These icons that he was personally present for. And so therefore an avatar for us to ride on his shoulder. And so there's something about that that's really powerful for me too.
Yeah. 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 I love all of that. And I know that you're doing so many different things, especially right now working with youth in on the most important capacity of mental well-being, and, translating that into a book and everything is so important. And also just in the colleges, I'm bringing all of your wisdom, but I know most recently you've become certified with working with equine therapy and this new chapter. Just share how, maybe, is there an overlap? What is the overlap? I mean, I feel it,
Yes,
but let's hear
yes,
it from you.
there is. And I'll just back up just a little bit. When I was in the middle of, being known for shooting racers and Grand Prix cars, and F1 is something I grew up on as a kid. So my first heroes were Grand Prix drivers and not baseball players or football players. And so I was so fortunate to be in the right place at the right time to be one of those people that would be called upon to go and do that one on one. And so I got to meet many of my heroes, and there was a gathering of just motorsport people around. And the reason I tell you this is that this is 10 years before I ever got face to face with a horse in a professional way. And at this gathering, a woman I never met and didn't know, she opened with something startling. And you see how there's a theme, a pattern emerging here where people will say the most amazing things. And what she said to me was, and I quote because it's unforgettable, she goes, "You work with horses, don't you?" And I was kind of taken aback because I certainly didn't. I was working with horsepower, but that was more like the prancing stallions on the badge of a Ferrari. But she read
Yes.
something in me. She was intelligent. She wasn't tipsy from a cocktail party. She was, and so think about it. My respect for the divine feminine meant, okay, she can she be right? And so I didn't bother to disagree with her. I said, "Well, how did you know?" Well, yes. How did you know? Because I want to know more about this process of insight and so it was another 10 years before I started working with horses. But that seed, and you got to wonder, is this a great teacher who bumped into me and planted a seed because she saw my potential, something
Yeah.
in me, right? And
Yeah.
I accepted it. I didn't deny it. I didn't refute her and correct her. I didn't embarrass her by saying, "What are you talking about?" I just took it in. And so I tell you that backstory to tell you that um, finding my way to horses was one of those serendipity trips where I moved from Venice Beach to Idlewild, 2 hours east of LA, and up the hill at 5,000 feet. Yeah, there's some ranches around with horses, and we went there during COVID to take care of my mom who had just retired, and so it was one of those few things that we could do during lockdown was to step out into an open space. And so my sweetheart and I um, looked for some volunteering we could do at a rescue ranch. And she had more experience than I did. I saw horses when I was a kid in Kentucky, and that was my first experience. And I loved it, but I didn't know that this thing would bloom. And over that time of caring for these rescue horses, something in me was it just sparked. And so you talk about the overlap. What is it about horses and ourselves that was so rich for me? And I got to tell you that I've never met a horse that lied. They're honest
Mhm.
all the way down to their marrow, and that's kind of incredible. There's also a lot of non-judgment. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about being present with a creature whose first trigger is fight or flight. And the
Yes.
psychologists and neurologists and trauma people will say that lines right up. Horses are born with the instincts, especially if they're born in the wild, like Mustangs, which are my favorites, with fight or flight. And means that they relate straight across the board to anybody with PTSD. So,
Mhm.
without going into, well, what PTSD do I have that I recognize myself in these animals? It's almost beside the point. Any human being who's gone through some suffering or grief and loss or what have you, just being human. The first noble truth is life is suffering. So that's the suffering of
Yes.
illness, aging, death and dying, separation, abandonment. It's like that's the first noble truth. So therefore I accept the first noble truth because I'm not lying to myself that life is peachy all the time.
Oh,
Therefore,
yes.
therefore you ask, well, where do I go to be understood? And who understands me? And in meeting horses up close and personal in quiet moments, and I'm not talking about your, carnival ponies that are so domesticated that they lose their instincts. I'm talking about horse nature in the herd, and especially if you get Mustangs who have been gentled from the wild. It's raw, and for anybody who's never met a horse, imagine the ease of which you understand that your dog can give you empathy and comfort and so forth. Well, most dogs are under 100 pounds. Imagine 1,000 pounds of
Oh,
animal
yes.
that is
Oh,
so sensitive. And you know, because you've come to see horses with me, you've
yeah,
had
yeah.
some experience. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways, maybe similar to how for you it seems like horses found you. Maybe you didn't go out looking for them. Yeah, your introduction to me had a horse find me, and I was deeply touched, just emotionally, really kind of blown open. It's another being. It's kind of like, I'll say it this way, like falling in love, like when you have that feeling of somebody understanding you, just instantaneously being with that ground animal that, it's so simplistic, it's very primitive, it's a beautiful piece of nature. So anybody out there who hasn't interacted with horses, connect with Tony because he will find you these beautiful creatures and help you go through that journey and development. And it's not the first time I've heard of equine therapy. I know when my son was younger, he had some exposure, we had some friends, but I never took that opportunity for myself. So really, thank you for introducing me to the beautiful horse that I still see in my dreams often. I do feel connected to that horse. It woke up a part of me, I think, that, had to speak. That horse spirit really definitely was just amazing experience. But
Well, here's the thing I may have said to you earlier, and at the risk of repeating myself, it's maybe good to share with whoever's watching that the beauty you see in that horse is the beauty you hold within yourself. They're perfect mirrors. They're reflecting the beauty that you have. And so there's something about being recognized and regarded and seen as a thing of beauty is quite something. So yeah, that falling in love feeling is probably in there pretty strongly when it happens. And the whole point is that they're actually holding space for you. So if that language means anything to you and you're like, what is holding space? Being present without any strings attached and no agenda and no schedule and just being present. Well, all those things are front and present in that experience with horses, especially the ones that are geared towards therapeutic learning. And so, yeah, that's why I had to do that. I knew that certification was the highest standard for being an equine specialist. And so in a funny way, it's something I've been working towards my whole life, really.
I'm so glad you said it that way. I can see it from my perspective of watching you in that part of the journey. It really found you. So I think, I know we said equine therapy is specifically for people who may be healing and have psychic wounds and have things like trauma, which I also feel, breath work is key with the work that I do. But it's also something that you can do without, any of the struggles as a pre-qualifier. Same with breath work, just to enhance your life. So I just want to say that, go out there, have this opportunity, connect with Tony. Tony, it's been so lovely having this conversation. I think we could have like 20 more conversations for many hours and share it with people, which is love to hear. I loved hearing your stories. I really appreciate everything you shared. Where can people find you online? Of course, I will drop the links in the show notes below, but let's hear it from you where, people can connect with you and come and have these experiences with you.
Well, thanks. As a photographer, I'm on Instagram at Di Zinno, which is the radical sign Dizino. There's two N's in there, so it's like, are you dizzy? No, I'm not dizzy. And yeah, so that's an easy way to see some of the work I've done and hit me up with a DM. And of course, we're on most social media, so easy to find when you are looking.
Perfect. And for the equine therapy stuff, I will share the links and things like that, but do you want to just share where you are, where you can be found?
Sure. Well, the thing is that I'm in a place called Mountain Center, California, um, and you can find me on LinkedIn if you're using that, and you don't have to necessarily come to me. We might, depending on where you are in the world, might be able to figure out something in terms of that because the skill set travels to wherever there are horses, and yeah. So I'm happy to to talk to anybody who's interested.
Perfect. Lovely. Again, thank you so much for coming here, sharing not just your wisdom, your life experiences, your beautiful story, but your beautiful, mindful way of looking at everything in life. Thank you. It's been a really pleasure to have you here on Inner Design.
Thanks. A pleasure to be here.